Award season again, that weird time of year where we talk about quiet dramas about grief like they're blockbusters. This is my review of Manchester by the Sea. Lee is a janitor who lives in a quiet area of Boston whose world kind of falls apart when his brother dies of a heart attack very suddenly. He has to go back to the area where he used to live, Manchester by the Sea, to break the news to his nephew, Patrick. While staying in Manchester by the Sea, he finds out that his brother's will names him as the guardian of Patrick. And, uncomfortable for that for a reason that's not immediately clear but eventually becomes apparent, he tries to work out a way of leaving Manchester by the Sea without deserting Patrick. The movie then follows the two guys dealing with their grief, in particular looking at what happened in Lee's past to find out what makes him such an emotionally closed person. The central performances in this movie are absolutely amazing, and I really can't talk enough about how well put together they are. Casey Affleck's being discussed a lot in the moment in the press because his performance in it is quite hard to pull off, I think, for a lot of actors. It's a very quiet role that he plays. Lee is a very closed-in guy, and that's not something, for obvious reasons, that most actors actually are, so it can be quite difficult, I think, for them to draw deep on that and make it work sometimes, but here he really manages it. For me, the best performance is probably Lucas Hedges, who plays Patrick, who is the 16-year-old nephew of Lee that he has to adopt. It's a fantastic performance, and quite rightly he's been nominated for a Rising Star Award at the BAFTAs this year, so fingers crossed for you, Lucas. He has to play someone quite outgoing and sort of gregarious in the sense that he's a teenager and he's kind of dealing with this by going back into his social life instead of actually confronting his grief, but at the same time he has to carry the quieter scenes with Lee in them. He's a kid who's been thrown into a difficult situation and he plays it with a sort of subtlety and light touch you don't see that often. And I think it's a great quality for a young male actor to have, so I'm hoping to see good things coming from him soon. And last but certainly not least, you have Michelle Williams, who's not in it much, but has a couple of really pivotal scenes, and I don't really want to spoil the film too much for you, but her work in it is great. You kind of wish she was in it slightly more, although for reasons to do with the plot she can't be. She's a complex, rounded character, and one of the nicest things about Williams' performance is that she kind of portrays her as being, I feel like, almost at the end of an emotional journey that Lee is kind of stuck halfway on. And that's quite an interesting take on the character that I think works really well in the film. There's a couple of really interesting things about this film that definitely mark it out as possibly awards-worthy. For instance, there's a non-linear telling of Lee's backstory that's fascinating in its structure because it sort of allows you to see the most important moments of his life without really over-dramatizing them. And by having it being completely non-linear, as in literally told out of sequence even within Lee's life, it means that they can mark out the most important moments for the corresponding important moment in the present day story. It's quite cerebral, and that means that it can be a little bit hard to follow sometimes. You often have to work out when a scene is taking place by basically who's alive or dead in it. But it does mean that they can get you a good flow of information about Lee without really making everything feel over-sentimental, which is always a risk with a story about the things this story is about. There's also some really compelling moments that are very well directed. There's a bit in particular where, spoilers, Patrick is taking some meat out of the freezer and he just starts to have a panic attack because he can't stop thinking about his dad in the freezer at the mortuary. And following that, Lee basically has to put Patrick on suicide watch, so watching these two grieving but quite gruff Bostonian men kind of trying not to talk about how sad their lives are at the moment is a really well put together sequence. And because of the non-linear structure, it's matched with a moment where Lee leaves Manchester and goes back to Boston and gets a little terrible flat there, which is the one that we see him living in at the start of the movie. So we kind of get to see some really sad moments in the two guys' lives run together. That's a great sequence, a really well-matched set of scenes that tell the story in an interesting way. But even at times like these, sequences that I thought were really well made, I was kind of left wanting more, and in particular I felt like the reasons why I enjoyed those scenes were mostly to do with the story and the acting, both of which are fantastic, and less so to do with the execution, in particular the directing and the editing. Because there are things about this movie that are really quite frustrating. For one thing, Lonergan seems to be completely afraid of close-ups. Now, I know there's an argument about close-ups that maybe they over-sentimentalize emotion, and certainly you can see almost the opposite of this in Nocturnal Animals, Tom Ford's movie, that sometimes over-relies on close-ups. That said, in a movie that is entirely about closed, quiet emotions, it would be really helpful to be able to see the characters' faces in full, because then you can see those little movements of an eye, the little twitches in a cheek that a really good actor can make into part of their performance on screen. If we're going to stay in wides all the time, then it's much harder to see that. And that leads on to another problem, which is to do with the editing. Now, if you're going to stick on a wide, I think that's okay, and I think that can be quite a good choice. I've been watching a lot of foreign language movies recently, in particular a movie called Baden Baden that came out this year. It's a Belgian movie, and the woman who directed it almost always uses wides. There's very few close-ups, and it's similarly about sort of some quite closed-in emotions. But what she does in those scenes is that they don't cut. You know, they show that scene for quite a while sometimes from the same angle, and what it means is that you can watch the performance unfold in the scene. With a movie like Manchester by the Sea that's so much about the acting, it would be nice to be able to sit and watch a performance change and grow over the course of a scene. Because heavens knows the actors in this movie are really well accomplished and they can do that. Unfortunately, the editor doesn't give them space to. They often cut around quite quickly, they're kind of like flitting from shot to shot in certain points, and it's just a bit hard to tell why that's the case. One possibility is that Lonergan did a lot of improv with the actors, and that definitely is what they did with the kids as far as I can tell, because their performances are really natural, despite them being very small. They're like 5, I think, is the oldest one. To get a performance like that out of a kid, you've got to do improv. So I'd imagine that they'd have multiple cameras cutting between them. That I can understand. What I don't understand is, unless you're doing improv with the adult actors as well, why you would cut around so much in this movie. It just needs silence, quiet, time to develop. That's there in the performances already. Why not match it in the pace of the edit? So overall, did I love Manchester by the Sea? No, not really. I can't quite see why it's being considered to be such a amazing film, because actually you've got people all over the world making similar sized dramas that are done as well or better, Baden Baden for instance, that are not getting anywhere near as much press. And I know that's something to do with the awards and how I shouldn't stress about it, because a lot of you said that in the comments for Silence and on Reddit when I posted it as well. But awards do stress me out, and it makes me angry that a movie like this will get more noise than another movie. That said, I think it's a really good movie that is worthy of awards for some things, maybe not for all the stuff it's been nominated for, but definitely for some things. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of Winter's Bone, the Jennifer Lawrence movie that kind of catapulted her into the public eye. In Winter's Bone, Jennifer Lawrence is the only really, really good thing about the movie. The rest of it is just fine. I feel like a similar thing has happened with Manchester by the Sea, where the writing and the acting is so good that it overshadows how, not mediocre, but middling the direction and the editing are. So mixed blessings, definitely worth a watch, bring some tissues, and maybe set aside some time for quiet reflection after you see the film. Hope you enjoyed my review. I know it was a little bit less structured than what I usually do, but I was trying to be a little bit less formal about the awards movies, because I know you'll be reading a lot of very serious kind of like, ooh, deep review stuff about it, so I wanted to cover it in a slightly less formal way. Hope you enjoyed the video. Give me a like if you did. Click subscribe if you loved it and you want to see more of my little face. And if you've got anything to say about Manchester by the Sea, get involved in the comments down below. Have a good one. I'll see you later.